Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, a Pittsburgh Steelers podcast made by fans like you, for fans like you. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Joe Kuzma, and when I say that the Steel City Underground is a website or a podcast for fans like you, by fans like you, it's because I truly mean it. I have a passion for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I imagine if you're listening to this right now, you have the same passion for your team, or otherwise you wouldn't be listening. Of course, if we didn't have the Pittsburgh Steelers, I wouldn't be talking. So a lot of times I'm probably more upbeat and positive than the general public, who have no problem with saying whether or not a player is trash or a player is garbage, or even to the point where they'll say there's a draft pick who's a bust. Okay, it takes a lot to say a draft pick is a bust, and I'm not beneath saying a player is underperforming or yada, yada, yada. And it's kind of where I'm coming from with today's show. It's coulda, woulda, shoulda. And where I'm starting from today is a difference of opinion. And oftentimes I do get difference of opinions from people on the various social media networks that I'm on, the different groups, the different forums, be it I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I get email. Truly, I appreciate feedback. I'm not saying I'm always right. I'm not always going to try and prove I'm right, but I'm at least trying to prove my opinion. And if you have a difference of that opinion, that's okay. And that's kind of where I'm coming from with one of the more recent articles I published over on SteelCityUnderground.com with my contributor over from Steelers Grind, Eric Herman. He come up with something that I hadn't thought about before. And his article was on an angle of whether or not the Steelers got bailed out by drafting Dre Archer, because in the event of coulda, woulda, shoulda. And I'm going to explain coulda, woulda, shoulda. When you're going to watch the draft here in about a month, there's going to be some armchair quarterbacks. You're going to have day one, you're going to have day two, you're going to have day three. You're going to have a lot to talk about. You're going to have all these picks to talk about. And everyone's already talking about, hey, what position are the Pittsburgh Steelers looking at taking? What players are they looking at taking? Okay. Well, they're looking at, let's say, cornerback. Oh, okay. Which cornerbacks are they looking at? Well, you know what? I wouldn't have picked that cornerback. I would have taken this guy from college B instead of college C. And you get all of this coulda, woulda, shoulda. And what happened was, in the 2014 draft, the Pittsburgh Steelers did make somewhat of a luxury pick. Yeah, somewhat. Okay, I'm kind of lowering the expectations that someone may have had for Dre Archer. But really, what were the expectations when the Pittsburgh Steelers took Dre Archer? I really want to ask that. And to say he's a busted pick is maybe a little bit unfair for what his role was to be. Okay, a luxury, yes. Third round, the Steelers did not need to take a running back in the third round, and they had many of other options that were available to them at that time. Coulda, woulda, shoulda. And we'll get to that in 1 second, but I understand the logic behind drafting someone like Dre Archer. Dre Archer was the fastest player in the NFL draft in 2014. Okay? The fastest player at the combine anyway. So the Steelers, and particularly offensive coordinator Todd Haley, had always been playing around with these smaller little scatback types. They had signed Lerod Stevens-Howling for the 1 year, and he got hurt in a season opener, and that didn't work out. And then you had a 5th round pick on Chris Rainey. That didn't work out either. So where these guys were filling a role, besides just being this little change of pace back that weren't expected to carry the load, maybe catch a few passes or go out wide and be kind of a gadget player, was to be a kick returner or maybe even a punt returner. But primarily, Dre Archer had opened eyes as a kick returner in college too. Okay, what has the NFL been totally against? Roger Goodell and company have come out, and what have they been against? They've been against kick returns. And I'm going to get into another show here in the near future and talk about the NFL rules and the changes and whatnot. I'm a little behind the curve on that, as I only put out this show maybe 2 or 3 times a week. That's okay. I'm going to get to that. But the rule changes, in effect, pretty much just, they pulled the rug out from Dre Archer. if you're undersized, which Dre Archer was, for a running back, for an NFL running back particularly, what is your role going to be if you can no longer return kicks? Ooh, yeah, the silence, the pause. That's me too, because the Steelers were investing in something that is no longer a priority, and something that the NFL is pretty much trying to eliminate, and that's the kick return. And we'll see that this year as they try to move the touchback up from the 20-yard line to starting on the 25-yard line, and some of the experimental things that they have been doing, such as moving up the kick, so now these kickers could really boom it out of the back of the end zone, and they're really trying to eliminate the kick return because players are getting injured. Okay, so in 2014, the front office of the Pittsburgh Steelers they're looking at their draft board. They're in the third round, and they're trying to prioritize if maybe the third phase of football is important for them to invest in maybe getting a kick returner. And by doing so, they end up passing on a few other players who get drafted right behind Dre Archer. Oh my God, we took a running back. A little undersized, quick guy that's probably going to get blown up, hurt, and not help this team whatsoever. And turns out many of you are right in that opinion. That's not necessarily my full opinion on it, but coulda, woulda, shoulda. And you take a look at some of the guys who got drafted right after Dre Archer. You had Richard Rodgers, tight end from the Green Bay Packers. Crockett Gilmore, also tight end of the Baltimore Ravens. You had Devontae Freeman, who broke out as a running back for the Atlanta Falcons just this past season. And then you get further down the list, and, you know, those are bigger names. Would the Steelers have maybe looked at a tight end in the third round? I'm sure, I'm sure it was on their mind. I mean, did they see anything in first of all, did they see anything in Richard Rodgers or Crockett Gilmore that told them we have to take this guy over Dre Archer? No, they didn't. So they obviously took Dre Archer over that. And for the criticism of the Steelers front office and not taking any players in the secondary, whether it be a cornerback or a safety, that was the coulda, woulda, shoulda. They didn't take a defensive back. And you look at the guys who went right immediately after Dre Archer and up into the person that was taken that Eric pointed out to me, and it just was a light bulb that went off over my head, because when you look at the draft list, the Steelers took Dre Archer 97th overall in the third round, and then you start to get into the picks right into the beginning of the fourth round. And the first pick in the fourth round, 101 overall, Jalen Watkins to the Philadelphia Eagles. Jalen Watkins being the half brother of one Sammy Watkins, wide receiver, superstar extraordinaire of the Buffalo Bills. And as you might remember, a highly sought after player and when he was drafted. But Jalen Watkins, it's not like if you went coulda, woulda, shoulda and thought maybe they should have taken Jalen Watkins, I think everyone would think you're nuts, because Jalen Watkins probably had a worse NFL career thus far than Dre Archer. He hasn't even been able to stay on a roster. And that's the fourth round pick for the Philadelphia Eagles. So you could always do worse, people. You could always do worse with your coulda, woulda, shoulda. But that's just one guy. And you look at, and I hope I don't butcher his name, but I think it's Bashaud Breeland from the Washington Redskins. He goes at 102. The very next pick is another corner. And Breeland, he actually got some playing time and has been okay. Okay. He had a couple picks last year, and he got to start in his rookie season when D'Angelo Hall went down. So they weren't taking him with any expectation of him starting right away, but he got tossed into the fire. And, that happens. And he's been pretty solid. The next corner that was taken, 109. So you're looking at 12 picks after Dre Archer. The Buffalo Bills select Ross Cockrell. Holy cow, coulda, woulda, shoulda. What if the Steelers should have took Ross Cockrell? Well, coulda, woulda, shoulda. You look at what happened, and the Buffalo Bills cut Ross Cockrell at the end of last year's preseason, right as they made the 53-man roster cuts. And the Pittsburgh Steelers, they come out and they even said, I remember them saying that they had their eye on Ross Cockrell. They come out and mention it, of course, after they claim him off of waivers and they build him up. They're not going to talk anybody down. I mean, they just added this guy to their 53-man roster, right? They went out and acquired him. They're not going to say, oh, well, you know what? He sucks. I don't want him on my team, but you know what? It was the only thing available. Well, it's kind of the whole point of this is with coulda, woulda, shoulda is a lot of times we say, oh, they should have taken that guy instead of this guy. Or they should have went after this position instead of this position. And now we actually got to see how that worked out for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And so what Eric's point was, when presented to me, is the Steelers kind of got bailed out by being able to acquire Ross Cockrell, put him on his roster, and show everybody what they did. And they also got bailed out because they didn't take Ross Cockrell, and he still ends up on your roster, and he still ends up being a pretty halfway decent, solid player. Holy cow, coulda, woulda, shoulda. Okay, so maybe the Dre Archer experiment didn't work out. But the one that, like, everybody always gets on me because, I'm talking to my cousin today, and he was reading this same article that we put over on Steel City Underground where we're talking about the dual opinions between me and Eric. And another guy to come up in this article was Landry Jones. And I tell you what, my cousin really teases me, and I was joking back and forth with him that he's going to get me a number 3 jersey because, I don't see that Landry Jones is like this giant bum. Okay, he's a third-string quarterback. I mean, he wears number 3 is the irony there. And I said, if that never worked out, you could add a 1 in front of the 3 and give me a Dre Archer jersey. So shoot me over both of them. But you're looking at the guy who went directly in front of Landry Jones in the 2013 draft. The Steelers invest a 4th-round pick in Landry Jones, okay? He's been a third-string quarterback. He's never been a guy that they said is supposed to be the man. And you've heard me many times harp on, especially in the last show where I talk about all the reasons the Steelers aren't going to draft a quarterback. They have a Hall of Fame quarterback already. Many teams don't even have a starter, let alone a bona fide starter and future Hall of Famer as a quarterback. So, a lot of people were puzzled too by why they even took Landry Jones or spent a 4th-round pick at this time. And he's a third stringer, okay? Probably not even a backup quality, but he went out there and he did win a game. And no matter, you're not going to convince me otherwise that having 4 out of 5 drives result in scores against Arizona isn't winning the game. Yes, okay. He has Antonio Brown. He has Le'Veon Bell around him. He has Martavis Bryant. I understand that. But you know what? Peyton Manning had the worst statistical career of any quarterback that went to a Super Bowl this year. And he went to a Super Bowl. So it doesn't matter to me, just as long as the guy isn't hurting your team. If he's helping your team, why not give him the credit? Okay? He did all right. He wasn't spectacular. He's not Ben Roethlisberger, and I'm not saying that. Jeez. But some of the people who wanted a corner, the Dallas Cowboys, 1 pick ahead of where the Steelers were going to select Landry Jones, and they take B.W. Webb. And then we get to see how B.W. Webb coulda, woulda, shoulda worked out because the Steelers picked him up off of waivers too. Oh, now we see how this works. So B.W. Webb on the Steelers roster for all of training camp last year, and the Steelers played 5 preseason games last year, okay? B.W. Webb does not end up making the roster, the final 53-man roster. In fact, Ross Cockrell does. And so does Landry Jones. Okay, Landry Jones was probably on thin ice going into last year, and I'd be the last person to say that I was going to defend Landry Jones for much of the 2015 season because I thought he was just abysmal and horrible for all those preseason games. I go to some of these games, people. I actually watch these games, and he made me want to cry. He looked terrified out there, but he looked like a different player during the preseason. I'm like, okay, I'm going to give this guy a chance. And then Bruce Gradkowski gets hurt. And obviously the Pittsburgh Steelers front office didn't think that Landry Jones is the answer. Not if Big Ben gets hurt. And we saw what happened when Big Ben got hurt. So they go out and get Michael Vick, a veteran quarterback, to be the backup. That's a smart decision. I don't have a problem with that whatsoever. That is a smart decision. But Landry Jones has still been in the system. He's been learning. And you saw what happened when he went out there when Vic went down. Vic wasn't able to generate much of anything. And they weren't allowing Vic to throw the passes they were letting Landry Jones throw. And they felt they seemingly had not only the confidence to allow Landry Jones to make these throws and make these decisions regardless of the outcome, regardless if he threw a pick. And yeah, I feel terrible for the kid. He comes in, most of the time he's coming in the second half. He's not the guy taking the all of the reps in practice leading up through the week and leading up to the game. He is a fill-in guy who's cold, sitting on the bench, coming in and being called in to an NFL game to play and most likely keep a lead or come back from behind and win a game. Good Lord, if you can't see it the same way I can, the guy's up against a huge amount of pressure. So for Landry Jones to come out there and not completely screw it up and help this team stay in playoff contention and eventually, yes, make the playoffs, that is not a bust. That is so worth that 4th round pick, if only for this year the Steelers end up as a wild card team who does win by, albeit by, I don't even want to talk about the Bengals game, how ugly that is, but a win is a win is a win. And they won, and they were so close to beating the Denver Broncos and being the AFC Championship game. And when you consider teams across the NFL don't even have a quarterback, let alone a backup or a backup of a backup, or in this case, Landry Jones had Bruce Gradkowski and Michael Vick ahead of him on the backup chart behind the starter Ben Roethlisberger. He was the 4th guy off the bench, and the Pittsburgh Steelers, still a playoff caliber team, not in spite of Landry Jones one way or the other, but you know what? I feel, hey, that's a halfway decent pick. So when everyone's running Landry Jones's name through the mud, and I'm the great Landry Jones defender here, I don't care. I still think Landry Jones, much more valuable than B.W. Webb ever would have been for this team, or even the Cowboys who originally took him. So what little he did contribute is great. Be thankful and move on. Now there's guys calling for his, not only me defending him, but calling for his head. Hey, he's under contract right now. What do you want? There's one more year left. If we draft a quarterback, that quarterback will never see the field as long as Ben Roethlisberger is in a Steelers uniform. Why would we waste a draft pick and kick somebody that's under contract that we're already paying off the team? That doesn't make any sense, at least not to me. But that's not to say that Landry Jones should be the number 2 either, okay? I get it. I think Bruce Gradkowski has a chance of coming back here. Mike Tomlin likes Gradkowski. I have no problem with Gradkowski if we do re-sign him. I do think, and it's, I don't want to add to the rumor mill out there, but the Houston Texans, if they drop somebody like Brian Hoyer, who, if anyone remembers, was on our roster a few years ago and then got snagged off the practice squad as we played the same type of I want to say Duck Duck Goose, but that wasn't the one I was looking for. But musical chairs with the quarterbacks. Duck Duck Goose. Coulda, woulda, shoulda, right? So musical chairs with the quarterbacks. If the Houston Texans drop Brian Hoyer and the Steelers can afford to acquire and put him on the roster for about $1.5 million a year, by all means, I hope they do. And that's not a knock on Landry Jones whatsoever. And I'm happy. Landry Jones, hey, 3, 4, 5-year NFL career. Here's a guy who already knows the system, no matter who the other backup is that comes here. A guy that already knows the system, capable of holding the clipboard if need be, and he's shown what he's going to show. Okay, everyone, but he's under contract. You're not going to go and just release this guy and then have to replace 2 spots, your number 2 and number 3, and there isn't a guy you're going to pull in off the street. At least not out of the draft if you're going to burn a draft pick, which, of course, I've already said the reasons why we won't. That may give you a better shot. No matter what you think, it's just not the logical move. So Landry Jones is going to stay put. Just just deal with it. And the Steelers coulda, woulda, shoulda. They could have taken this guy or that guy. Why did they take Archer? Why did they take Jones? Now we see that it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, because many of the other players who were taken around the same time, and even showing that the players that the Steelers were likely targeting, i.e. those players in the secondary and the defensive backs that everyone covets for this team, would not have panned out to have been any better draft choices than the guys the Pittsburgh Steelers did end up selecting. Well, maybe in the case of Dre Archer, that isn't true, but as we've seen, and as Eric said, the Steelers got bailed out on this one. Hey, everyone, thank you for listening. Thank you for letting me voice my opinion, and I totally look forward to getting flamed on social media by even suggesting that Landry Jones wasn't a busted draft pick. Until next time, thanks for listening.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.